And we'll let them get their slides shared. And then I'll hand it off. All right, looks like Meg. Okay, looks good, Meg. See the slide? So we'll hand it off to you and you're good to go.
Awesome, thank you. I'm looking for the way to share SlideShare with the rest of the folks on the chat, just so people know. We practiced this yesterday, but I guess in a webinar form, it's a little different, right? I guess I will just manually do it, team, just so you know. You'll just tell me when. Okay. Hi all, I'm Meg McMahon and I use they, them pronouns. I'm the user experience researcher here at Harvard Library. This past February to April, I led a group of 14 librarians in experimentation with ChatGPT+. Each week we met to discuss our successes, frustrations, and we built on each other's work to find the most successful use cases of using ChatGPT+ for our individual work and library work at large. You'll learn more about some of the use cases when my co-presenters Chris Hyde, Mark McGee, and Beth Coop share their found use cases. First, I wanted to share the names of the individuals who participated in the project. Without them, this work wouldn't have been possible. As you can see, this group represented a wide range of library work. And in our final meeting, the group noted that this project's success was due to the diversity of library staff participating in the project and then the subsequent diversity of experiments. The AI steering committee for Harvard Library created the goals of this project, and I just wanted to give context for everyone here to know our goals. Evaluate the usefulness of ChatGPT Plus for library researchers engaged with image research, data analysis, or AV content. Identify ways in which ChatGPT Plus could help streamline processes, enhance library service offerings, or add efficiencies. And recommend what level of access to ChatGPT Plus is needed for library staff on a limited or broad scale. These goals were chosen because ChatGPT Plus offers capabilities beyond basic chatbots, such as image recognition, analysis of large data sets, and interaction with audio and visual content. In our analysis, the group focused on ChatGPT Plus's premium features. When asked to lead the project, I spent a lot of time considering the structure. The group participated in a kickoff meeting to collaboratively set goals and prioritize experiments. And the group met weekly for 3 months to discuss the experiments and see demonstrations of experiments from other library group members. Before each meeting, individuals were tasked with independently experimenting with ChatGPT Plus for at least 1 hour each week in preparation for the meeting. Individuals were asked to record successful prompts in a journal, and I personally believe this recording of the prompts was crucial so other group members could learn what language ChatGPT Plus preferred as prompt language. Towards the end of the 3 months, I interviewed each group member individually to discuss their perceptions of ChatGPT Plus and understand the most successful experiments. At this time, I drafted a final report, which the group helped edit, and the group co-created a use case library together. Here's what really stood out. The success wasn't instant, and that's what made it meaningful. Like learning a new language, it took about a month for our experiments to really hit their stride. This aha moment timeline had taught us something crucial about building AI literacy. It's not about the quick wins, but about giving people space and time to develop genuine frequency and fluency with these tools. At the end, our group had put together a use case library with use cases and prompting guidance documentation. And these were both created to help our colleagues start using ChatGPT Plus. I'm actually going to share with these with everyone in the chat after this. To showcase both of these documents, our group held an open meeting for our whole library in May after the project concluded. And finally, I wanted to note that one of the tangible outputs, or actually both of our tangible outputs, the use case library and the prompting documentation, serve as practical resources. But the true value lies in what they really represent, a foundation of shared experience and expertise that can be built on. This practice-based approach has created folks across our library who understand the technology's potential and practical application. This combination of documented resources and human expertise positions our library to thoughtfully engage and use AI within our work across the organization. I'd like to introduce the use cases you'll see from my colleagues. You'll be hearing from Chris Hyde on using ChatGPT as a non-programmer to create some code, Mark McGee on creating Python scripts when working with GeoJSON files, and from Beth Coop on formatting metadata for archival description. I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Thanks, Meg. Next slide, please. Harvard has a great digital repository that holds a great number of files and file formats. But for some of the work I do, primarily in providing images to students and faculty, it has some severe limitations. Next slide, please. The worst of these problems is that you can't bulk download files from the depository. Only zip files with accompanying metadata and the image files that I need buried and nested in subfolders. Previously, requests for lots of images meant manually downloading the files, unzipping them, copying them to a different location, and processing them to the proper format. The only other option was downloading JP2s one by one from the repository and processing them from there. Next slide, please. In the course of working on the AI group at Harvard, I started to think about how ChatGPT, not just that it itself would solve my problems, but that I could use it as a tool to do my work more efficiently. During the pilot project, though I'm not a programmer and I don't work at the command line much, I experimented with installing Python, installing tools like Tesseract and Whisper, and trying command line tasks despite having little programming experience. Next slide, please. After the pilot project ended, I continued to use ChatGPT as I thought it might help solve this particular difficult problem. The bulk download issue, I spent some time, hours working with basic scripts and installing various Python libraries when I found things that I thought I might be able to automate. Next slide, please. I then decided to apply what I had learned and to use ChatGPT to approach this particular problem. I asked ChatGPT to write me scripts, Python scripts to handle the unzipping and to process either TIFFs or JP2s to JPEGs that I can send along to faculty and students for their work. Next slide, please. After figuring out individual scripts for these two tasks and ensuring that they worked, or maybe I should say we, finally combined them into one final script that does everything I need to process down bulk downloads from a single script. One thing that's great with AI is you can break down problems into chunks and then combine the things you get very easily to solve particular problems. Last slide, please. While I think this all might seem trivial to someone who knows Python and who knows how to write scripts, as someone who had never done that before, this was a total revelation to me. I now have a working script that will unzip the files from the repository and make the TIFFs or JPEGs that I need. The efficiency gains for me are enormous. I just recently had a request from a faculty member for 718 files that we had digitized for him a decade ago, but he could no longer find. 2 years ago or a year ago, this task would have taken me, I would say, the better part of 2 days. Now, when I got the request, I completed it in less than the time that it took to do this talk. Thank you, and I'll pass it on to Mark.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, my name is Mark McGee. I am the Geospatial Metadata Librarian at Harvard Library. In my role, I work with various metadata standards, and I'm often presented with one-off projects that require the manipulation of various metadata elements and files. Next slide, please. And today I'll be demonstrating a common metadata management use case related to some recent system migration work we've undertaken. The challenge of this task was to create a CSV lookup table relating unique identifiers for the same resource between two library systems. In this case, the two identifiers exist as embedded data within each resource, a GeoJSON file. I had a directory of these files totaling about 70 resources, but one can easily imagine this project being at a much larger scale. This is work we obviously wanted to automate. My background is that I've taken various intros to Python throughout my career, but Python is not something I've been able to naturally integrate into my workflows, and I've forgotten most of what I've learned. Next slide, please. To give you a clearer sense of the task, here's a look at one of the source data files. One identifier is embedded in the file name, which you can see at the top circled, and then another identifier is embedded within the GeoJSON file as part of a reference URL. And in the background is the directory of files I'm working with. Next slide, please. So as part of our pilot project, for this task, I turned to ChatGPT Plus. What you're seeing here is the final prompt I used to produce some Python code to test the task. It was very much an iterative process to get to this prompt. It's somewhat similar to the coding and debugging process where there's some trial and error involved. As I was building out this prompt, I added more specific requests from ChatGPT Plus, including providing it with example key value JSON data, asking it to remove extraneous text from the ID URL and the file name, providing it with the exact CSV output I expected, and I also included the directory for source and output files. Next slide. And this is the Python script it produced. The comments are helpful for learning and following the logic of the script. Next slide. I used Jupyter Notebook as part of the Anaconda Navigator software package, which is an open source tool that allows you to run scripts in a GUI interface. For a non-coder, it is a relatively straightforward way to manage running Python scripts. And I was really excited to run this script in Jupyter, but when I did, I received the error message seen here. Some sort of esoteric, at least to me, Unicode error message. Next slide. I went back to ChatGPT and I said, well, you created this script, can you fix it? And feeding the error message back into ChatGPT, it gave me some updated code, and I ran it again in Jupyter Notebook. Next slide. And it worked. However, I noticed that the number of lines in my lookup table did not match the number of GeoJSON files I had in my directory. It was off by 1. And you should always QA the outputs of generative AI. In thinking about this error, I wondered if any of these files were lacking a Hollis ID, and perhaps the script had skipped providing information for that file. Next slide. I reprompted ChatGPT to adjust the script to anticipate null values. Looking closer at the null example here, I discovered that the Hollis ID, which is our catalog ID, wasn't actually null, but instead the GeoJSON key element was mislabeled. So I was able to go back in and fix the source GeoJSON file. After performing a sample QA on the data sets, I feel safe calling this lookup table correct now. In the end, using ChatGPT Plus was a relatively fast way to produce some Python script I probably wouldn't have otherwise attempted. I can imagine many more tasks in my future where I'll be giving ChatGPT a first crack at solving. I'm really excited about the prospects of using generative AI applications in this way, and I think it really expands the toolbox for folks with data management tasks without having to have extensive coding experience. Thanks for listening, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Bets now.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Mark. My name is Bets Cope, and I'm the head of archival operations for technical services and archives and special collections, which is a newly integrated unit that serves Harvard University Archives and Houghton Library in particular. I oversee a team of accessioning and processing archivists. Before I begin, I want to say that the collection I'll be discussing contains materials related to the slave trade in Cuba, and some troubling content and language may appear on the slides. It will be verbal content, but I still want to make sure everyone is aware. I am our last panelist for this group, so if you want to step away, I'll be presenting for the next 4 or 5 minutes. Next slide, please. So Houghton Library routinely uses dealer or donor lists that we receive with collections at accessioning in our baseline archival processing. At the beginning of this year, Houghton received a dealer list of over 150 manuscripts to add as an accrual to an archival collection of documents related to the Cuban slave trade. We want such lists as tabular data, for example, an Excel spreadsheet, to be able to import into ArchiveSpace, our finding aid system of record. Unfortunately, the dealer sent a format I could not convert into Excel, and our accessioning team was frustrated. We process archival collections at accessioning, and we really prefer to make use of as much data as we get from donors and dealers, rather than create more minimal finding aids. However, rekeying the list of more than 150 manuscripts would be more time than we can spend at accessioning. We just happened to be 1 week into the ChatGPT Plus pilot project, and I'd watched some prompting videos and decided to see what it could do for me. Initially, I tried to load the entire dealer list into ChatGPT Plus, which was 17 pages of a PDF, and the list itself was embedded in a chart that appeared as an image within the PDF. But ChatGPT Plus timed out before it could pull it out. For context, this was in January of this year. I tried it again just a few weeks ago to prepare for this presentation, and it still can't pull out the data that way. You can actually see a screenshot of its response on October 8th here. So I decided to try going page by page, uploading it actually as image files instead of a PDF. Next slide, please. So I started fresh with this prompt. The most important thing about this prompt was to give ChatGPT cues for the archival context and our description standard, as well as noting particular language from our pilot group conversations about transcription. I was also trying to be sure about parsing out the data it transcribed in a useful way for the archive space importer template that we use. The last 2 lines were critical to keep the system from timing out or trying to run other processes that failed in my first attempts to get the data out in a workable manner. If it tried to transcribe multiple pages, it timed out. If it tried a different method of extraction beyond manual transcription, quote unquote, it simply failed to be able to work with the images. Next slide, please. It was time consuming for ChatGPT to transcribe each page, and sometimes it got stuck, but it was able to work through each page and create a single Excel spreadsheet that it updated with each page as it worked. Although it did require some human edits, the process was considerably faster than rekeying a dealer list. I could also ask the system to make reparative edits to the spreadsheet, adjusting language to be more appropriate for our current inclusive description standards, removing potentially harmful terms. Though this still requires a human eye and editing, it was helpful to have the system make initial changes that I could then adjust as needed. I will say that when I redid this experiment for this presentation, ChatGPT 4 was considerably better at this than earlier models. It's still important to have human intervention, but the system is better. I also asked ChatGPT to create a DAX compliant scope and content note for the material. It struggled with some of the rules of DAX, despite being able to give me the definition of what a scope and content note is, but the note could be adjusted to be series level description. And just for fun, I tried turning this list into basically a finding aid itself, asking ChatGPT Plus to EAD encode an XML finding aid for it, which it was able to do. And it also could create a collection level record in MARC with minimal additional information and adjustments. Next slide, please. The accrual is now processed as part of the collection. It looks a little different because it's hard to exactly replicate experiments with ChatGPT, particularly 9 months apart and in different models. But this prompt and method were used to generate what is publicly available. I did make sure to state that the description was generated using AI when this was done, and that it was also based on dealer description, all within the processing information note in the finding aid. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to answer your questions in the next 2 minutes I think we have left for our session, or in the chat, or if you'd like to contact us directly, just via email at the addresses on the slides. Thank you.
Just so folks know, I'm looking for a Q&A box, but I don't see one as a panelist. So if there are questions, we might need help from the folks running the webinar.